Well, a very good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the afternoon session. Just a bit of a show of hands if you were here this morning, just so I know who's got more information than me. Okay, and you're all still awake, which is good, so it was a good morning. My name is Steve Mills, Millsy from 882 6PR. We're proud to be a sponsor of Homeless Persons Week, and this is the second year I've been invited to moderate the debate on homelessness. I can honestly say thank to the great Lord that I've never been homeless. I have been displaced from time to time where I didn't have anywhere to stay one night, and I had friends lucky enough that could look after me. So I have a feeling with the audience that I broadcast to that a lot of people are only maybe one or two paychecks away from being in a financial situation which any of us could be in. So I do have a feeling for the subject. I do have a compassion for what we're trying to achieve this week. And I think today's topic, which is being put on, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Community Housing Coalition of WA, of course the peak body for community housing providers for homelessness in Western Australia. We'd like to welcome you to the debate, and the topic's an interesting one. It's how do we best, I'd like to emphasise that, how do we best reduce the cost of homelessness? And that can take on many, many, many facets. We'll be pleased to know that we want to include you in the discussion more than anything this afternoon. So if you feel that you have a question, later on, Novak John over here, the good-looking bloke controlling the knobs, he has a microphone. We're actually filming this, so we might be able to use the microphone. So if you have a question to ask later on, if you could just say, hi, I'm Steve from 6PR, and I'd like to ask a question of the entire panel or just of yourself. So welcome aboard. I know that some of you have come a fair way to be here today, and you'll bring hopefully an understanding of homelessness not only in Perth but right throughout the state of WA. Is that possible? Can we reach that outreach today? Because I don't want to just hone in on Perth. I think the problems go beyond Perth, and we're happy to look at that. Let us introduce our panel. Now, you didn't get a chance to quiz this fella this morning. I've had a chance to interview him on radio, and I was really looking forward to him visiting our fine state. He's the founding physician of the Boston Healthcare, and he's part of our panel this afternoon. Please welcome again Dr. Jim O'Connell. Jim. Jim, as he put to me yesterday when we first met, could have been a multi-billionaire by now with the kind of fees that doctors can charge, but fell in love with the homeless early on in his career, and no doubt you heard a little bit of his journey this morning, but I don't think you had the opportunity to really pick his brain, so I would really like to make sure that we get that opportunity this afternoon. So welcome aboard. The topic is, how do we best reduce the cost of homelessness? Can you give us a summation of how you think we could answer that question based on what you bring to the discussion today? Welcome.
Are you going to make me sit up here all by myself and
yes,
answer that?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Remember, I'm the foreigner here. You have to be... I think there are many, many ways we can reduce the cost of homelessness. I would flag one thing that has tortured us a lot, and it was brought up in Professor Flatow's talk this morning, is that it's an eclectic group of people we're talking about. And I think you can save lots and lots of dollars with certain segments of the population, but I think other segments, I think if we want to take good care of them, it's probably going to cost us as a society to take care of them. So that said, I think we've learned clearly that leaving people outside, leaving people in the shelters for long periods of time costs us a lot of money. Understanding those costs is now the topic of research all over the world, and I think some of the research that you're doing here in Australia, where you actually have control of some of the data, unlike in our country where we don't, you have a lot to contribute to helping us understand what those costs are, so that when we do studies you can see are they reduced or not. And I think when you start to house people who've been living on the streets, you see lots of things improve in their lives, the quality of life improves, and for the large numbers of them, the costs that we are spending for them go way down.
Okay.
And I also would just add that I think the integration of care is probably the other thing, that I think housing providers working closely with healthcare providers, working with the people who understand job training and labor and stuff like that is probably going to be the way we work together to reduce costs.
Cool. Well, thanks again for coming to Perth. We do appreciate it. Big round of applause for Jim being our first panellist. When we read titles like Assistant Commissioner, we should be standing to attention and saluting, but when you know Lawrence Panea, you know that he's been a cop on the beat for 30 years. He's dealt at policing at all levels and no doubt has been exposed to this topic, and we'd like to welcome him onto the stage as our second panellist. Please welcome Acting Assistant Commissioner Lawrence Panea.
Thank you for coming here.
We did have a chat earlier and I said Carl might be looking at moving on, and are you putting your hand up and are we looking at the next Commissioner? Can we really start to make the pitch right now? And he said, not for me, brother. No. So I think he's certainly aware of what this topic is. Let's talk about your opening remarks.
Well, in terms of the specific question here about the cost of homelessness, I suppose, and knowing that most people in this room obviously are either practitioners in the area or very, very interested, clearly the criminal law and its sanctions and the homelessness just don't mix very well, and don't mix very well at all. In fact, none of that is designed, I think, to deal with homelessness. And speaking with Anne-Margaret, who you'll hear from shortly, all the work we do and then all the work the judiciary may do, I don't think any of it then goes to resolve the issues of homelessness or the issues those people face. So I think the cost of that is very high and very ineffective.
We see you as the Assistant Commissioner, we see you as a police officer, but we also see you as a bloke who has feelings. No doubt you see a lot of stuff on the street and the law isn't really built to deal with those situations that you see.
No, it's not, and that really is the issue. And I suppose from a policing perspective, it would be nice to see options developed, particularly at that front line, you know, where the officers are dealing with homeless people, because they would invariably come to our notice for either public order offences, usually those low-end offences, and the options open to us when dealing with them are very, very limited, which I suppose then, but police officers obviously being public servants and there to act on your behalf, will take some action, and unfortunately that action usually ends up with an arrest or a summons of some sort, rather than other options of being able to deal with that situation.
Lawrence has been to a team building meeting this morning and is ready for anything you want to throw at him later today, so he's ready for it. Give him a big welcome for being part of the panel today. Once Lawrence and his team has done their job, normally the next person steps up, and that's Anne-Margaret Walsh, the Principal Solicitor at the Street Law Centre here in WA. Please welcome Anne-Margaret to the stage. It's an area where passion is a must. It's not driven by money, it's driven by a sense of equity, a sense of a fair go. Is there a fair go out on the street? When we have a look at this topic today, how do we best reduce the cost of homelessness?
Well, essentially not to involve the law enforcement processes or the justice system will reduce the cost of homelessness. And I think that's what His Honour the Chief Justice outlined this morning as well. But having said that, the cost is not just economic, but we rely on use of law enforcement as a method of dealing with the issues of homelessness, which we don't need to do and shouldn't do. With the result, the compounding legal issues are being forced through the justice system and are a cost not just to the individual, but economically, but also psychosocially, as it further increases their social exclusion, which is particularly important for someone that's sleeping rough. If they have mental health issues, those issues may well be exacerbated as well. The law enforcement approaches to homelessness issues involves a layer of interaction, not just with the WA Police Services, the courts, corrective services, fines enforcement registry, Centrelink, lawyers, the list goes on, and the costs increase. So I think needs to be a strategic response with all stakeholders included, and what came out of the sort of the group discussions, it needs to be an integrated and collaborative response with the issues of the individual being the primary focus.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much for being part of it today, Anne-Margaret Walsh. Whenever I feel that I might be getting apathetic about this particular topic, I heard this guy's address for the opening of the week on Monday, and it stirred me and the passion that I'm sure a lot of you have and who carry it with you each and every day. But he is the Executive Officer at the Community Housing Coalition of WA, speaks his mind, probably too much sometimes for some, but that's what he wants to do and that's what he's paid to do. Barry Doyle. Barry, come on up. Barry, the topic, how do we best reduce the cost of homelessness? I'm sure you've put some thought in not only to the topic but also into the answer.
Yeah, and I think as you alluded to earlier, there's more than one answer to this question, and my esteemed colleagues who I thank for being here today to support the coalition and this week have alluded to some of them. Look, I just want to focus on the housing piece because my members, community housing coalitions, that's their core business. They deal with a diverse range of clients. But those members of mine who deal extensively or almost exclusively with homeless clients will tell me time and time again that perhaps the biggest problem they have is finding long-term accommodation and suitable accommodation for the clients that they're serving. So if we're talking about reducing the cost of homelessness or we're talking about getting to grips with this issue, any answer simply must involve a better answer to the question, how are we going to grow the social housing system and affordable rental properties with security of tenure for people who find themselves in this position.
Okay, well, thanks again for being part of it today. That's our panel. Hopefully you've got a bit of an understanding of where they come from. Can I start the ball rolling by actually asking a question to the panel in general? We talk about cost, and you talked about opportunity cost of the community, cost to the community. Who should carry that cost? Should there be one responsible agency? I know that you've got to talk about all agencies working together, but is this a federal issue? I probably can leave you out, Jim, being an interloper to some degree, but is it a federal issue?
It is a federal issue, and as you said, it's also a state issue, a local government issue, a community issue, a community services organisation issue, and an individuals issue. And I don't think, I know in terms of funding we need to probably separate things out, but I think overall it has to be a strategic response involving all of those major stakeholders.
One of the major things to make programs work, though, comes from a big bucket of money, and the big bucket of money is obviously with the Commonwealth, well, it has been. Is that filtering through enough to be able to address the issue? Is probably another way of looking at it.
Well,
Barry, don't jump at it.
All right, well, okay, I suppose if we want to talk about where we are now, we have a stay of execution, if I want to put it that way, on the National Partnership Agreements on Homelessness. And the value of that programme is that we have really good data about how the programmes that sat under it travelled. And really, by any fair metric, they worked extremely well. Homelessness providers and community housing providers in this space are facing the appalling vista, it seems to me, of those programmes being retired after June next year. And already there's been an indication from the federal government that they may significantly reform and arguably reduce what it sees to be its role in homelessness. And I think between now and kind of May, June next year, it's beholden on the sector and anybody really with an interest in this subject to make sure that they don't wash their hands of it completely.
So currently there's 9,000, closing in on 10,000 homeless people in Western Australia and growing. If that comes to pass, what are those numbers likely to be based on your projections?
Well, what we know about, first of all, I mean, only 10% of the homeless population, and very important 10%, but 90% of people who are homeless are not on the street. They are in a position of homelessness for want of affordable accommodation. We know, based on projections, that that demand is going to grow. We've got independent studies that show this, just as a function of the population ageing and growing. So if we have a situation where federal government starts to foist the responsibility for homelessness and housing, indeed, onto the states, then that's not a good thing. Because we know the demand is going to grow, we know that present day supply is inadequate, and we also know that we don't really have a comprehensive plan to increase that supply.
So the cost in not addressing it, Jim, the cost of just ignoring it and waiting to address it and put the fire out here, put the fire out there, you're probably a little bit in front of where we are based on your own experience. What are the costs?
I think the costs that I worry about are the costs that I think were discussed today, because it's the justice costs that come on, the housing costs, the healthcare costs, which are significant, the police costs, and when we've looked at that around the country, it can get really staggering. What I would love to just check on here, I don't know the politics of the Commonwealth versus the state. What I do know from a simplistic version from home is that when you begin to work, as many of the folks in the thing are doing, to address the problem as we all do in our incremental way. If you are starting to save money, usually what you're doing is saving money to a system that's over here that doesn't know you're saving them that money. So someone who sits above it needs to know that as we distribute, as things are working, we're saving money. The classic for us is when we get people housed, and Medicaid in our state doesn't have to pay lots of money for that person anymore. The housing program doesn't get that savings. They do the work, but the savings is to Medicaid, who has no idea that it's being done. So someone needs to be sitting above it. In our world, it's probably the federal government.
Is there any model from anywhere in the world that has got it right?
Boy, that's a great question, Stephen. I don't know of any model that has it really well. It's not likely to be in the United States where we don't have good, universal data. I suspect it's going to come from a country where you have a single payer for healthcare and a single payer for the social services.
After your appearance on our Talkback program, the feedback we got was some people choose homelessness. They choose to be homeless. So they are beyond any form of help. They choose that way of life. Now, out of, say, the 8,000 odd that you house in Boston, what percentage would fit that bill?
That they choose to be homeless?
Yes, that choose it as an active way of life.
I don't think we've run to anyone who's chosen to be homeless.
But
I
would
say
you
that
agree
really
that
candidly.
people have that opinion, that people...
People do. What we have seen a lot is when people are on the streets, they'll often say they're choosing to live on the streets. And what we have learned, if you talk to somebody, is that they're choosing not to be in a 700-bed shelter where it's hard to be, or they're choosing not to be in a dangerous, violent situation somewhere else. So they are not by choice, but by default on the street. And I think that's an important way to change it. One of the issues that came up with Housing First is how many of the people, if you went out with a key and said, here's an apartment, do you want it? We had thought maybe many people would say, no, I'd rather be here. And in the last 10 years of Housing First with our very chronic street folks, we've had 2 people say, no, I can't handle a house. That was it.
The cost to the society, Lawrence, in regards to, I think the stat was given earlier in the week by one of the people at the intro to the week, was that if you're on the streets for more than 6 weeks, there's a high probability that you'll develop some form of mental issue, or you have an issue that you need to address. How many people have given up that you have to deal with that basically don't give a hoot about society or its laws or its regulations?
Well, it shows, it greatly shows, and I think you're right. I think it's, I'm not sure the actual term, but it's like a comorbidity, isn't it? A lot of the homeless, you'll see ever-present mental health issues as well. And in terms of, Perth's a really good example of it, as over the recent years that infill's occurred in the CBD. The places that the homeless were are now places that are highly populated. More and more calls coming into police to start to come and deal with these issues. Of course, as you deal with them, as I said, the criminal law is not set up for that. And, the first thing you face, of course, is, if you think about it, arrest versus summons. One of the criteria for that is that obviously we can find somewhere to send the summons to. So as soon as we can't do that, you're more likely now to be arrested. That's probably the highest thing you face. And of course, and me and Margaret spoke about this earlier, the courts then dealing with that will probably end up giving you a fine which you can't pay, which then puts you on the fines enforcement register, which then gives another warrant of arrest for us later when you haven't paid it, and the cycle just keeps going. So that very small issue, and none of which, by the way, either myself or Anne Margaret or anyone else, have gone any way to resolving any of those issues.
But that's the cost to our society, because we're spending resources chasing paperwork, basically, and making sure that the process is followed through rather than actually addressing the issues.
Exactly, and that's exactly my point. That's exactly what happens. We will chase through those processes, and it'll go all the way through, and there's costs involved all the way along. Don't just think about the 2 police officers that have attended. There's the lawyers involved, the court staff involved, the people lodging the fines registry itself. All those issues all add up, and yet not one thing has given any assistance to this homeless person or any of the issues that might be associated with them.
The opportunity cost is probably the cost. The opportunity that the community gives up by not actually having someone in a place which is stable or where they feel safe. I mean, one of the things that hit home, I think, and we could bring out, and I invite your questions at any time, was the fact that a lot of us can go home tonight and seek shelter, seek refuge and get some relief. And I'm not on edge, I know that I'm safe. You must deal with people that don't feel safe. And we talk about people don't feel safe in their own home. How unsafe would they feel out on the street?
Well, exactly, and I think you'll find the statistics will show being homeless, your rate of being a victim of crime increases dramatically as much as your rate of being an offender. So that rises as dramatically as anything else. So, and you'll often see it that they've been subject to some very serious assaults while they're out there.
So am I too simplistic? And this is where I want the audience to use your expertise. Is it too simplistic to say bring down the number of homeless people and you'll reduce the cost of homelessness to our community? Is that too simplistic a way to actually look at it? In other words, if we address and try and work out solutions, that will gradually bring down the number of people that don't have a place to live, do have a place to live, I should say, and therefore reduce the cost of homelessness. So that's what I'd like to take it. Please use the panel for any form of expertise you need. Would you mind just standing, if possible, and just identifying yourself and where you're from? Sorry to get you out of your comfort zone.
No, that's okay.
Thank you very much.
The question I
Sorry,
have,
your name?
Sorry, my name's Wendy and I'm from Avenue Youth in Northam.
Thank you.
The question I have, why are Homes West or Department of Housing as they are now building houses for people in Ellenbrook to buy through opening doors scheme and not concentrating on building rental houses for some of these people that are homeless?
Barry, you're probably the best one to actually answer that. I think
Well,
you've got an opinion.
I mean, look, you know,
Department of Housing here?
I alluded to that very question in my presentation earlier on. It seems to me that what happened was about 08-09 we had a social housing task force which was a response to a specific problem, and that specific problem was overwhelming demand for social housing and inadequate supply. And I remember working under Sue Ash in terms of the preparation of that report when I was working for Wycos. The goalposts, it seemed to me, got slightly shifted in the intervening period, where we weren't just talking about social housing anymore, we were talking about housing affordability responses, where there was a conflation of supply of all kinds. So a Key Start loan is counted in exactly the same way as a new public housing dwelling. Now, the problem with that, as you've alluded to, is that Key Start loans and shared ownership products are really for people who are on moderate incomes, those who can service a mortgage. Our constituency, people who are either public housing eligible, and that includes about 40,000 people, or a significant cohort just above that. You have to remember, you have to be pretty badly off to even qualify for public housing. They cannot service mortgages. They don't have the income to service the mortgages. And really, if we put them in a position where they had to, you might even be doing them a disservice. So you would have to ask our policymakers why that policy ideological shift has taken place. But it has taken place, I agree with you.
Can I raise the question? You come from Northam, did you say? Yep. The price of land in Northam would be cheaper than the price of land in the Perth metropolitan area. So one would think the availability of housing would be cheaper in that part of the world?
No. It's the same supply and demand problem. Even though there's space, the land's not released. And then you've got the concurrent building costs. So a really good example is the Department of Housing built a house in Wildcatcham, which is sort of way up in Banjo country. And it cost, there was a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, had to be brick and tile because they're not allowed to build non-brick and tile because the damage bill is too high sometimes. Over $600,000 just to build it because they had land. So yeah, it's the
Sorry,
same.
did you say $600,000 to build a 4x2?
Single, where's their budget actually? One single bed dwelling in Wildcatcham to house a family because they had this family on their wait list for a very, very, very long time.
Okay, so let's hone in on that with your own knowledge. If more land was made available for public housing, we're not talking about buying or taking an equity stake, but more land was to become available and more money was put aside for that, would that address part of the cost of homelessness? Or are the problems deeper than that?
Only if the houses could be built on it.
That's what the land would be dedicated for. And that's the type of lobbying that needs to happen.
Well, then the problem with that, and here I am talking again, the problem with that is that they tried that and they put all the Department of Housing people into little suburbs like Balga, and then you get ghettos. So there is a problem with, if you do that, it has to be scattered, because when you have people with similar socio-economic factors living together in the same space, they tend to compound.
That doesn't have to be the case. I remember a land development at Cable Beach in Broome, where part of the developer's approval process was that they had to scatter X number of blocks of public housing blocks within the subdivision.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean, we're not asking for money, you're not asking for money there, you're saying, why have we lost the debate? Why have we lost the ability to be able to convince those that we don't want them all scattered in one area? Because I don't think they want to live like that either. But what we do want is we want a return to some equity where we say it's the right thing to do. But why has that disappeared? Why have we lost that debate? And is that an issue that you're familiar with in your part of the world, Dr. Jim?
Absolutely. It's a little slightly different, but the way the response in a place like Boston and New York has been that whenever anybody is given a permit to build anything, a certain percentage of the units have to be low income. Our ability to build new public housing, it's all slightly different, is really limited by the land. And the land that is available is privately owned. So when private owners try to build a new building in Boston, they have to dedicate 10% to low income. But then we run into the same problem that Barry just described.
That hasn't disappeared though? It's still part of public policy?
It's absolutely public policy.
Does anyone know the public policy now for new release land? For rezoning and all that kind of stuff? Is there a policy? Who could add to that, sir?
I don't know all the details, but say Ellenbrook, to get approval, there's a certain percentage for a bit like what Barry was saying, there's the people that can actually afford it but cheaper, and they have to put in a certain amount of shops and doctors and all that sort of stuff. So it is part of that policy. Okay. But you still end up having to pay for it and not low rent. So.
Do we need people on the microphone to talk? I think we do, because we want to record it for people that couldn't be with us today. Sorry about that. Thank you. Just to the front.
Yeah, just Lynn McLaren, Greens MLC.
Hi, Lynn.
I just wanted to let you know that the policy is that when Land Corps has land and they're going to develop it, their requirement is 10% is social housing. Now, you might recall that when Elizabeth Key was proposed, and I pointed out that that was Land Corps land, that then required them to put 10% down there in public housing. And at that time, the housing minister did say, oh, oops, well, we're going to have to do that. Now, that's something we all need to make sure that they come good with that promise.
But just to hone in on the point that Barry said, public housing as in I'm making a public house available for you to buy, I'm making a public house available for you to rent, are two different things.
Absolutely. I mean, that is some shifty business that occurred in this government, that the housing policy gradually became about affordable housing for people to own. And the minister quite clearly said that in her speech today. She said that is their goal. So the whole goal about public housing and what we now call social housing, which includes community housing, has dropped off the political agenda. And that is something we need to put right back front and center.
So if that is the case, Anne Margaret, if that's the case that we're honing in on, we want to encourage home ownership, it's an admirable dream to have, but I'm sure the people that you deal with on the street are so far removed from being able to want to attract enough accreditation to get a credit card, let alone get a mortgage. That's just dream stuff, isn't it?
Well, that's right. I mean, I have clients that have fines in excess of $17,000. They may as well have $1 million mortgage because their ability to pay that off is non-existent. There's a 21-year-old with fines in excess of $27,000. So, no, they don't have the ability to service a mortgage. They would be struggling with the ability to service probably rent through social housing. Given the New Start allowance is, I think, approximately $36 a day, and youth allowance is roughly $250 a week, if they're eligible for those.
I'll give you one interesting statistic, actually, that was in the Department of Housing annual report. In the year 2011-2012, the Housing Pathways Unit in the department, which was set up to basically transition people out of public housing and off the list, they were charged with finding people in the public housing system or on the public housing wait list that they could transition into home ownership. And in that year, they only managed to find 12 households that were in a position to do that. And I think it's likely that many of those households who were transferred, if not all of them, were probably people who had significantly breached the income limits in order to be able to do that in the first place.
Steve, can I ask a question just... Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, Jim, sorry.
This is just trying to understand something, but in our country, one of the major ways for housing our folks are through what's called Section 8 certificates, which come from HUD, which are vouchers given to an individual where they can then go rent at fair market rent a place, and they pay 30% of their income, and the government guarantees the rest. And that's the most active way of housing that we have. So it's not public housing per se, but it's you go find any rental that you can and you've got a voucher. And getting on that list, of course, is the same, but the people who do have that, the housing stock is a different issue. Is there something similar to that in Australia?
Well, Commonwealth Rent Assistance and NRAS to a degree, yeah.
So that's
Twiggy Forrest was talking a similar kind of voucher scheme last week, which was an interesting concept. With you though, I mean, you must have your own issues. Let's fire them up a bit here. Let's try and get some answers, because I think we've got some already that we need to address. Ma'am.
My name's Robin. I work mainly with Aboriginal people.
Sorry, Robin, we'll just get you on the microphone. So you've got a beautiful voice. We want you to hear it. There we go.
Just in relation to Twiggy's report the other day, we had Tony Abbott coming out saying we just need the kids to go to school. Well, it's pretty impossible for the kids to go to school if they don't have a house. The kids don't have a bedroom. They might be living in a house with 20 other people because they've been evicted, or they're on the 5-year waiting list. So until the kids are going to go to school, they need a house. And there's no housing stock. We can't get people into homes. There's not 20,000 people on the housing list. There's 49,000 people, individuals, waiting for a house in WA. We're the rich state.
Say that again.
This invitation here says that there's 20,294 applicants on the housing list, the waiting list, and there's 43,070 people individuals on that waiting list. And that we have, I think it's about 4,000 people on the priority waiting list. That's for emergency
4,000.
housing. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right. Those figures are
4,000
correct.
on the
How
priority
quickly,
list?
how long will it be on the priority waiting list for?
Well, the Minister will tell you that it's about 14 months when he's been asked in Parliament. Our experience is that we've had people on the priority housing list since 2009. And when we ring up...
Sorry, 2009.
2009.
So therefore that translates into issues that you're dealing with all the time, Lawrence. I mean, they must say, look, no one cares about me, why should I care about the law?
Yeah, look, I'd love to just share an example with you of what we've been doing. It was Robin, was it? Right in that space you're talking about, and without making any comment about the Department of Housing and their 3 strikes policy and everything that goes with that. We had a family who were a particularly bad family, I might say. I don't know what other descriptor to use other than I reckon we probably got about 30 calls a week to that one house. They were always going to be subject to the 3 strikes and eventually were, which gave us the opportunity to engage with them, to say, you know, if you don't engage with us and start working with us, your opportunity to be housed is absolutely nil, given their living status and so forth. And you're absolutely right, there were families co-located with them, the whole bit. Kids weren't going to school, as you might imagine, and they had about 3 kids under the age of 12. So we engaged with them and we worked very, very hard with that family to make sure that we linked them into some housing. We had to do it through one of the community-based organisations rather than through anything else. We, at the same time, worked with them to get their kids engaged in school and get them some stability. And I think the facts of the matter is, since we started with that family in February, We've had a 95% attendance rate at school by those kids and 0 offending since February. It's absolutely nil. But what worries me about that whole scenario is, and we're now expanding that project with other government agencies to take on other families, if we weren't there to do that for them, and given the level of I call it intensive support that we've been giving, they had a 0 chance of actually finding a house or getting those kids engaged, or anything else that was going to. They were homeless for all intents and purposes. In fact, we only had them housed in the church out at Coolbellup for some time, trying to find them a house in the meantime. That's how difficult it can be for even us at our level trying to deal with those type of situations, let alone a family who is in absolute crisis at the time. So that just follows on, and you could multiply that out by...
Yeah. A great example. I mean, I don't know about you. You do this for a living. It's your passion. It's what you do. It's what you desire to do. How frustrating is it to see if you go to a place like, I don't want to name the suburb, but it's built around a golf course, and I reckon 80% of the houses are vacant. 80% of the houses have no one in them, and if they are accommodated, it would probably be about 2 or 3 months of the year tops. The rest of the time they sit vacant. We're talking prime real estate. And you kind of look at it and think, that could house someone. Does anyone have a program where they start to kind of look and say, you know what, we could do a deal here, we could give you an income stream, we can give you some tax advantages here? Are we being clever enough rather than saying we need to build more stock? Because there's stock out there. The stock that's sitting out there tonight that no one's living in, but no one seems to know the answer of actually unlocking that key. It never really ceases to amaze me that. Is anyone working in that area? Do you understand what I'm talking about when I raise that up? Let me just say that it's built near Mandurah, and it's built around the ocean, and it's called The Cut. Okay, and the only reason why is that I would go to a corporate golf day, drive around in a buggy, have a few beers, have a good time, but I'd see all these houses with no furniture on the veranda. There was evidence that no one was living there. And when you talk to the locals, no one goes there. And I saw that. Good on them for having the ability to own that, but I also saw it as an opportunity to say, well, that's a nice spot for someone to be living, maybe not all year round, but as a temporary spot where you can say, look, we're prepared to actually rent your property for a period of time. Their opportunities abound. Do we need to think a little bit more radically rather than just saying it's the government's problem? I'm just throwing it up there. There must be other radical thinkers in the room, and that's the idea of today. Don't sit there and hold it in, because one idea could actually germinate, or you might think that's a stupid idea.
He's saying house prices aren't high enough to enforce occupancy.
I'm really not saying anything, and the people that own those properties, good luck to them. But I see an opportunity there.
The census data, we actually, Steve, looked at the census data from 2011 on vacant properties. Now, there's some problems with the data in terms of ascertaining exactly if these properties are empty, but in the Perth local government area, there's breakdowns local government area by local government area, and the Perth local government area, about 15% of all dwellings were vacant on the night of the census. And in regional areas, it's even higher than that. But look, the first thing you have to understand is that, the housing system is not designed to provide universal provision. Therefore, it doesn't. Right? So the question is then, do you shift the political ideology, the will, to have it do something differently? Now, I heard a person speak, a community housing provider speak from England, and he was over where, they have a lot of the same problems over there, and indeed where I'm from in Ireland. But the difference is that they're actively talking about social and affordable housing policies and equity solutions to the housing system in the mainstream. They're talking about new developments with 20% social and affordable mandates, inclusionary zoning. And it's not just the loony lefties saying it. This is the mainstay of the debate. And we're a little bit away from that yet, but I think we
So how did they get to that stage?
Well, I think well, first of all, they've got a far greater tradition of housing equity in a lot of ways. We kind of came into this where we didn't really have much of a housing problem, or certainly not as pronounced as it is now, until the housing boom. And then it was a bit like we had this massive housing boom, we had escalating rents, really high house prices, and we realised that we had probably the most underdeveloped social and affordable housing system in the OECD. So we're starting to come to grips with it now. But I think it's about, I mean, you mentioned earlier on about people choosing to be homeless. I mean, I've visited members of Parliament here who tell you that there's people that are rocking up to their offices saying, I've got nowhere to stay tonight, and I don't have any drug and alcohol problems, I don't have anything like that, I just can't afford a rental, or I've been the victim of domestic abuse and I just need somewhere to stay.
And I get back to the fact that I have faith that the average Australian person, if that person was presented to them and they were legitimate, like those people that you say, and they do exist, and we could get through the barrier of all the connotations that go with this tag of being homeless, then surely anyone that had any compassion would say, sure, I'll do a deal. You can stay at my house for 6 months. I'm not using it. Talking about those places.
There were schemes announced in the private rental brokerage scheme, the Housing Pathways Unit in the Department of Housing, which is trying to leverage the private rental market to provide pathways out of homelessness and housing need. Recently, the problem's been that the market's been so good for landlords, that they didn't really need to avail of these schemes. I would think that now that the vacancy rate is going up, and basically it's getting a bit tougher for landlords rather than tenants, that we might see a bit more interest in being able to get people with investment properties into this space.
Sure, okay, that's promising. We talked Indigenous people, we've talked some people from Northern. I'd like to talk about special groups, maybe people working with women who find themselves homeless for whatever reason, maybe domestic violence. Is anyone working in that area, and the availability of homes, etc.? Is there enough resources being put in? Can you just share your experiences, because we'll put that to the panel as well, because I'm sure that will be an area I'd like to touch on others as well, without embarrassing you. Thank you. I'm sorry. I'll look away. Hi, what's your name?
My name's Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca.
I manage
Thanks for
two
coming.
women's refuges, one for single Aboriginal women and one for women and children. But there's absolutely no, especially for our Aboriginal women and children, there's absolutely no chance of affordable housing for these women. And for one of the biggest problems we have with the refuge with the women and children is that they have been displaced, they've been moved out of their homes, and they really don't have, they're on priority, and I have to agree, priority is actually not a year. It's actually 2 or 3 years now, if not longer.
So how do you manage?
We're being forced to continually move these women somewhere because we're a crisis refuge. So we're taking phone calls every day of women who are in crisis, but where do they go?
How do you case manage that?
The best we can. We just need to keep working every day and working hard with different agencies and different making partnerships. We've actually through Rotary made a partnership with a real estate company who will actually allow us to take our women in first to view a property. It's been creative.
That's terrific. Can you just explain how you got to that stage? I'm sure it just wasn't a matter of saying, hey, you can do that. I mean, that was obviously a job that you had to do.
My boss and I met with some members of the Rotary Club and went and had a dinner with them. They come to the refuge. Showing them and taking them for a walk around and actually saying this is what it is, like really cold face, because people do have the perception that people do want to be homeless or choose to be homeless, and it's actually not true. And giving them some of the stories, it really helps.
So you educated them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and answer their questions.
So Jim, that's what got you into it though. I mean, when we met yesterday, you said, my ambition was to be one of the greatest surgeons, and you probably are if you were able to open a body up. But from a point of view of homelessness, you were educated, they educated you. You actually got, by working with this group of people, a lot back yourself. And how did that education process develop within you? Because that's what happened.
Yeah, I think, you're grandizing my goal. I was just trying to get a job, Steve, to be honest with you. I was just trying to, no, I'm actually very much appreciating this discussion, because the lens through which I came in and saw the world was through the health problems of people coming in who happened to be homeless, and then that opened up the remainder of the world. And I find the discussion like this, really invigorating. In Boston, we have developed pretty good community collaboration between the hospitals and the health centers and our program to take good health care of people, with the obvious problem that if somebody's living on the streets or in the shelters forever, you can't really be real healthy. So we're swimming upstream, and the only way you can do it is to find housing, and we've been working very closely with the police. One of the things I was going to mention is, we are always fighting in our world about how to make sure this is a public health issue or a housing issue, not a criminal issue or a justice issue. So we meet regularly, once every 2 weeks, with the police and the outreach workers and the neighborhood associations and City Hall to find out where the problems are, and so that the police will tell us, would we please go and talk to people rather than have the police go and move people around? Because we all know the game is you move somebody from here, they're going to show up somewhere else, and then you're going to do that. So we're learning that it's actually a remarkably important community organizing tool to try to address this problem as a community, but getting people to be sensitive to the problem is the name of the game. So all that is just background by saying, I think what I was introduced to was I was insulated inside a hospital, ivory tower kind of hospital, and going out and realizing that all those things I thought I could do as a doctor, I couldn't do once you get out to the community unless everybody here was working together. And you're bringing up the diverse populations you're taking care of. So you may have a solution for one subpopulation, but it doesn't work for the others. So creative solutions are desperately needed.
I want to take the discussion around to the type of dwelling in a moment as well, but ma'am, please, you've got the floor. Someone's got the mic somewhere.
We actually had a question over here.
Oh, okay, sorry, and then I'll come back to you. Cheers.
Christine Smith from Esperance. I am the coordinator for a women's refuge, an 18-bed, and also we have a 27-bed hostel for homeless people, which is families, singles, men, women, Aboriginals, all live in the one house. But getting back to the public housing, in Esperance, where one particular road, I know Homes West owned maybe 30 houses, one house is left with Homes West, all the rest have been sold off. They're not replacing what they're selling in Esperance. About 12 years ago they knocked down 5 brick and tile flats and they were going to replace them, and they have never replaced them. That'd be 12 years ago. Again, like the other lady over there said, our clients, we work with them getting into, some of them have been on the waiting list 10 years. Priority doesn't really mean anything because they keep moving people onto it, so it gets longer and longer anyway.
10 years? I mean, one would hope that after 10 years the problem has actually solved itself.
No, I am now having clients in my house where the grandmothers were in 20 years ago, and now I'm having their children in. So as you say, it just goes in a big cycle if they haven't been given houses.
So if I said, is there a solution to break the cycle, what would you say?
Well, pardon?
If I said to you, is there a solution to break the cycle, is there one, and what is it?
I think that people that are given a house, whether it's in the private sector or not, we again go with them to inspections, we talk with the real estates. I suppose we take on a bit of responsibility that they're going to be able to be good tenants. I think you've got to work with them, and I think that's where a lot of departments are not funded to continue work with those people that are given houses, because most of them will accept you to help them in that house. They don't mind you calling in, they ring us. I mean, my clients are still ringing me 18 years later if they want to know something, because they've learnt to trust that particular agency. We work with every other agency in town, from mental health, hospital, drug and arms. We all talk in Esperance. Wow. So there's no point in being... in Esperance, we've got all the collaboration and cooperation, and that works really well. Okay,
thank you. I know you've got a question down the back, but did you want to add to the building? Because I think you're in a position to do so. Is that okay? Yeah. All right, and then we'll come straight back to you at the back. Thanks.
My name's Dave Kelly. I'm Labor's spokesperson for youth, and I know I'm in a safe space here, so I can say whatever I like, and I won't be reported in the press. Even 6PR won't report it. I just wanted to say, if we assume that the answer is more public housing. However we do it, there's got to be an increase in public housing. We're really moving against the prevailing political sort of ideology. And I agree with what Barry said. It's all about political will. The current government are wanting to get out of public housing, and the fact that they're not replacing public housing in places like Esperance, it's all part of that theme. The government would like to reduce its responsibility basically for this problem. We're also in an environment where smaller government is supposed to be better and lower taxes is the goal to solve every problem. So I suppose what I'm saying is if we're going to solve this problem and get more public housing, this sector really has to be involved in the public debate. We have to, if people who care about public housing, you have to make your voice heard. Now, I know that's not always easy, it's very difficult, but it is a problem. Basically, as Barry said, it's a problem of political will, and if we want this problem solved, we have to be loud and we have to be vocal.
So why did these people who are passionate about what they say, why are their voices being just whistling in the wind?
Well, I suppose I'm not here to defend the current government.
No, I'm not talking about the government, I'm talking all sides of politics. This has been going on for a while. It hasn't been just happening in the last 8 years.
It's the prevailing political paradigm. Small government is good, lower taxes. And any politician who says they're going to raise taxes in this climate, what's the general response you get? I mean, hopefully at some point I'll be a minister in a future Labor government. You can imagine, all right, I'm going to put up the rate of stamp duty to pay for more public housing. You can imagine the sort of response you get. Now, if we're going to break through those barriers, there has to be other voices in the debate, and they have to be really loud. The passion in this room is incredible on this issue. It's about using that passion to try and shift the political debate.
Sure.
And that's why these conferences are really tremendous.
Okay. Well, when you are the Minister for Housing, we'll be coming back and handing you.
Absolutely, I'd love that.
Right down the back, the lady's been very patient. If we can take it down that way. Thank you very much. The lady know who she is down the back, and then we'll come back to the front. Alternative types of dwellings is an area I'd like to go into as well. I remember last year someone had a fantastic idea, nothing's come of it, to be able to produce a house cheaper than $600,000. I reckon I could build 10 for that if you gave them the right strategy. Would you like just to identify yourself, Matt? Just turn it on if you wouldn't mind. Someone's turned it off.
From Tenancy WA. In regards to when you were talking about women and homelessness, I'd just like to discuss very quickly about the Residential Tenancies Act here in Western Australia. The Residential Tenancies Act here does not have provisions for domestic violence and tenancy. We're the only state in the country not to have any specific provisions to support women who have the means and capability to stay in the property and sign the agreement over just to herself, or to break lease without significant costs incurred.
Why don't we have that?
A good question. There was recently a domestic violence and law enhancement laws and DV submission paper from the Law Reform Commission of Western Australia, and one of those questions was about tenancy in WA.
Okay.
And that they actually said in their thing that there were significant provisions within the Act to be able to support these women. Now, we wrote a substantive submission in regards to tenancy, and we looked at all legislation across the state, and it was actually referred on to Department of Commerce to look at. So I think if we're looking at that creatively as well, and not just looking at housing stock, but we need to certainly look at our acts, our legislation in play to be able to make it easier.
Oh, we'll go to Anne Margaret on that one. Where are we at with that?
Where are we at with that? Well, Tenancy WA, the best people placed to really make comment with respect to that law reform issue, because street law hasn't been directly involved in that. But the submission they've put forward is really well founded and is necessary in terms of women. The greatest cause of homelessness, and everyone in this room knows this, for women is domestic violence. Women and children is domestic violence. And they need to have secure households and be able to remain in the households with the perpetrator exiting the household.
And them having secure tenure.
And having secure tenure, yeah.
Wow. That's a really good point. Yeah. I like it a lot. You got the mic and then over to the back.
Hi, I'm Francis Lynch. Many of you are here this morning, heard me speak. If I put my ACOS hat on as president of ACOS, I wanted to respond to what Dave was saying, is that I understand that the politics of the day talks about reducing government and reducing, the tax take, but it's actually, that's not the real politic of what's going on in the community. The real politic is we understand the cost of reducing services into the community is actually counterproductive. We're actually cutting services in a way, and this is, all governments across Australia seem to be on this same pattern of cutting services, and the impact of that is actually counterproductive. It's actually increasing the social impact in so many different ways. ACOS is actually one of the groups in Australia, along with a lot of other groups, that's saying, we've been in this cycle now for 10 or 15 years of governments reducing slowly the tax. We're now, most people in Australia don't realise that we're now one of the lowest taxing first world countries in the world, in the OECD group. We didn't used to be there, but we are there now. We're actually spending less on social services than most of the OECD countries. We're down there with Turkey and other places like that. That's a choice that successive governments have taken, and we can go back up, another 2 or 3% of GDP, and it doesn't have to change our world. We don't lose our flat screen TVs and cars.
But you've got to win that debate. You're not winning that debate. You're getting smashed on that debate.
Absolutely.
Because they're saying you're all too good. You're all Johnny too good. What do they call it when you're too goody? Goody two-shoot people. Yeah, you're do-gooders. That's the word I'm looking for. You're all bloody do-gooders.
But the economics actually are there.
Yeah, I know,
And
but
the
you're not
reality-
winning the debate. That's the problem. And that's what I think the point that you were making. You've got to get involved with the debate. And we all understand what you're saying is quite true. How much, you described earlier the work that you did in order to get that family back on. How much, is that really policing? I mean, we talk about community policing. No, seriously. And we then say, I'm worried about my house being broken into. I'm worried about my bike being ripped off, my car being knocked off.
Yep.
I'm worried about all that. So we need more police on the street.
Yep.
If we actually put the resources in on the ground to actually stop them breaking into your home, would that help?
Millsy, you're singing my song, actually. It's you're absolutely right. Is it policing? There'd be many people that would... actually, you'd probably even criticise me on radio, I reckon, Millsy, when you found out that come school holidays, I bought movie tickets and all sorts of stuff for these 12-year-olds to keep them engaged so they wouldn't break into your house and wouldn't break into your car and so forth. It's certainly a different approach. But and I take your point, Francis, exactly. I think the time has come to actually, and you know what? I think the reason we lose the debate is we pitch it wrong. We pitch it totally, because I think you're right. We need to base it in economics. The economics that one officer has cost me to work with that family, compared to the amount of call-outs that I've had to that family, the amount of police officer time that would have been spent dealing with the crime it caused, that one officer cost me a hell of a lot less than what it would have. I actually modelled that out, got Price Waterhouse involved to actually look at that, took that one family as an example and extrapolated it into the future and what it might cost the government in 30 years. And that one family, I think the yearly budget was going to be about 170 million if it continued on the way it was continuing on. So the pure economics of trying to intervene, make a break, change that dynamic will save government enormous amounts of money. And I think you've heard our Commissioner say it 1,000,000 times, stop giving me 500 more police officers, give me 100 more social workers, give me 100 more youth care workers, give me those type of people, because I'll make a bigger difference to you.
Sure.
Than, because 500 more police officers is actually going to increase your crime rate. That's all it's going to do.
And for the kind of money that these people are working on, you get 3 of you for 1 police officer.
So I should explain that. You're looking for me to explain. What I mean is, if you get 500 more police, we make 2 more arrests a week. Even if they're lazy, you've got 1,000 more arrests a week. What that does to your crime rate, it makes it look worse. So you really need to concentrate. I'm absolutely 100% with you. It's where you pitch it and it's how you sell it to government in terms of where the economics are of it, because that's what they'll listen to.
Yeah, Gary, I work with Communicare. I manage a few programs. One of them's breathing space. The Residential Tenancy Act, it does have to change to protect women and children. But in the meantime, there is a safe at home program that can actually fund making a property safe and so that the victim and children can stay in the property, and that includes lease fees and things like that. We take the perpetrators in, so the police remove them, or they remove themselves, or however that happens, and they come to us. Just on another issue, we applied to build transition accommodation 8 years ago on the breathing space site. The land's owned by Department of Housing. Thankfully, I can say it should be completed on the 15th of December, but that took 8 years. And it got sent back twice because it didn't fit in with the local streetscape. I would have had to go out and buy a couple of old couches and some shopping trolleys to fit in with the street. You know. But 8 years is ridiculous. But from December we can take an extra 12 men. So.
I like your concept, in particular in saying that we've got to find ways to accommodate people. And I remember last year the Greens were very vocal in regards to their housing policy, and it probably is the first policy that I really got excited by for a long time. I liked the policy on the basis that they said we've got to find other ways of building, and we've got to find more ways of actually accommodating people. And there's some examples happening. I mean, down at Success, that little cubicle thing that's building on top of one another, they're examples of policy that needs to change. And you can win that debate because you can win the debate on two levels. You can win it on the environment because people do care, and you can win it on the fact that you're going to solve a problem cheaper than what we can at the present time. I wonder whether we've made any ground in regards to making more alternative type of accommodation. We had a fellow here last year that was a lawyer. I don't know if you can remember, if you were here last year, he talked about, he had a group of guys that had a concept and he could accommodate a hell of a lot more people. 600,000 would have probably accommodated 1,000 people based on this bloke's plan. So are there any other ways? I mean, let's try and keep this a little bit positive. We've heard some good yarns today. What are some of the other methods that you're saying?
You've got a lot of houses in the older suburbs, basically, like especially, I'll go back to Northern because that's what I know, quarter acre blocks with one house on it. Why can't they subdivide it and put another house at the back? The land is already owned and paid for by Department of Housing. You don't necessarily have to use, not many brick and tile houses are in Northern, they're all 5 rows cement and tin roofs and things like that. You could put up, in one street alone, you could probably put in another 10 to 12 houses on the back of blocks that people don't use.
And then you'd have people in the neighbourhood objecting that you're moving more public housing.
The whole 10 rows of the houses that I'm thinking of are all owned by Homes West as it is now.
Right.
It's their land, their house, people pay rent.
Sure.
It's an idea.
Any others?
I think you've got to get local government to change their policies about their building.
Yeah. But haven't we seen that change? I mean, the granny flat legislation was part of that, part of the push, and I'm not saying that was a push.
Yes, but it isn't happening. You know, they've got such restricted rules on what you're allowed to build in your area that those little, what you were talking on top of each other, that would be just howled down unless the whole of the community got together and opposed what the Shire was not allowing to happen in their town.
Sure.
I mean, the rules are so strict. You can't, it's a bit like the man was saying, streetscape and all the things you've got to put in. It's just about impossible to build something that would help those people.
Can I also go into an area that you don't have to be unemployed to be homeless at the present time? Is anyone working in that area in regards to trying to address that issue? Like they've got an income coming in, but they still can't afford to actually live in a home because they can't afford the rent. And that to me seems to be, you've hit a crossroad there. Is that real, that problem, or is that just one that is booted up from time to time?
Yeah, well, a common one is a lease runs out, a landlord wants to sell, and the incumbents don't have anywhere else to go. But the market is loosening up a little bit now, but we don't want to pop the champagne because really the rents are still extremely high relative to people in the lower income brackets. But just on the supply side question, I think Christine is quite right, actually. The story of Australian housing over the last few years has been an inadequate supply response based in large part on an inability of the supply side to meet that demand, frustrated in large part by local government and state government imposition. Ridiculous planning regulations, taxes that should be got out of the way. Now, some people make arguments that, sensible planning, and I'm all for that, but really it's basically a pendulum between allowing builders to build, people to subdivide, get higher density into our suburbs, while still having that planning, considerations for proper planning. But it seems to me that we've been too concerned with the right side of that spectrum and too little on the left.
I'm Nikki, I'm an outreach worker around Fremantle. I'm just noticing a lot more, we talk about women and families being separated because of homelessness and the kids can't stay with the mum or mum and dad. There's just not a lot of, if you've, accommodation for families in the metro area, like even if it's just, 3 months, 6 months, up to a year, while they're on these priority wait lists, there's nowhere safe for them to go. And, in my line of work, we're coming across many that are coming from regional remote areas for many reasons. Some because family are down here for medical and other things, but there's nowhere for them to stay.
So where do they go?
They're just on the street. So
Well, the whole family?
Some of them, yeah.
In a car?
Or not even in the car, sometimes just in a squat. But there's nowhere for them, and if
So what do you do? I mean, you're dealing with these people.
Yeah.
How do you must get angry? Do you get emotional? I mean, what's the cost to you? And not only what's the cost to you, but what about the cost to the community?
We all just work really, and I also say from St. Pat's as well, we all just work together as a team. I mean, you've got your assertive outreach workers, you've got your housing support workers. I mean, the program, obviously MPAR, which is Street to Home program, and it's sort of under the same umbrella. We've done incredible amounts of work with housing people that have been living in their cars and living on the street, and it's increased tenfold with families and single fathers and single mothers. We've done incredible amounts of work with housing people, and obviously there's still the wait list, and a comment you made about surely it should have changed after 10 years. No, the amount of people that are on low incomes that can't afford rents, they do wait 10 years. The domestic violence, the whole, there's so much involved with the amount of work that we have all done under that program that they tried to stop and finish at the end of this year. They've given us another 12 months, which is fantastic. But this program actually works. You've got your mental health side, you've got your psychiatrists, your nurses, you've got your drug and alcohol services, you've got Department of Housing, community housing. There's just so much work that's been done to help, and these are the kind of programs that people don't hear about.
But you talk about the impact too, and it's the family. The family gets torn apart. Yep. Now, as I was dealing with the trauma, and you talk about this intergenerational homelessness, this intergenerational trauma, and you're never going to remediate that when there's still so much impacting on the whole family and then the extended families.
So we're just starting to see that splinter out now, aren't we? And when we say, how did that happen, you'll go back and say, I knew that family when they first became homeless. Yes, ma'am.
Just to add to that, my name is Anne. I'm the manager of homeless services for Uniting Care West, and we actually started a family homeless centre in the last 9 months because we had people literally arriving at I run a day centre for over 18s as well, and we were feeding families out the back and front in the alleyways, providing clothes to families in the car. In the last month, we had over 250 individuals come through the service, averaging about 60 to 70 families every month. They're there, they're in cars, they're secondary homeless, they're sleeping on other people's couches, they're moving from house to house, or they're literally in their cars or down the beaches. If you drive down towards Freo, you go down there, a lot of them are parked on all the beaches because they can get a shower or accommodation there. So they can come to us. They can have a meal, they can have support. We try and refer them through to other places to hopefully get some homes for them, and we have actually done that through a lot of our programs.
So there's no central location, and I'm not being...
But there's no funding for any of those.
So there's nowhere I can go and park my car, not that I want to live in it, but if I had to. There's no central location where I can get a hot shower.
And there's nowhere you can go.
At all?
No.
Not one agency is doing that?
We're the first agency to address family homelessness. There's no funding. There is no funding. there's no funding for this service.
No, so you're doing it through other means?
Through donations at the moment.
Is that a responsibility of the government? Is that a responsibility
Well, I
of the...
think we're saving
That's
a lot
the
of money.
cost we're talking
We're
about.
providing a service. You know, we're saving, you know, we are connecting those people through and often getting them through into housing options. Or
So when that money dries up, what happens?
we shut the door.
Sorry, and then to the lady in red, sorry, you're very patient.
Sorry, if I can just extend on that, I think it is definitely a funding issue. We are noticing with, for example, the MPAR funding, that's a lot of other programs that are really successful, that are getting really good results, are perhaps not fitting in with the government's ideas for their funding, and they're not continuing with those funding, or the funding for those programs are shaky. So as a result, we are losing really good workers in those programs. And we haven't employed new workers for those programs. And it goes back to the continuity issue, which Jim mentioned this morning. It's so important for that, as well as funding for different programs. And we've at St. Pat's run a day centre now. To get funding for our day centre is very difficult. Same sort of idea as the United Care West.
You raise a really good point, and that just to show how many people actually lost a staff member who was doing a great job because of the uncertainty whether the project would be very funded come the start of the last financial year or this financial year. Look at that. That's amazing. So what you're saying, look, just give us a program rather than having to be accountable each and every year. Acknowledge the problem's going to be there in 5 years' time as well.
I think the reality with especially with getting rough sleepers into housing, it's a very complex issue and requires very intensive, requires a lot of wraparound services, a lot of work with a person, and it's not a quick fix. These, for many people in that situation, they have been in that situation for a long time, and there are a number of issues that they're trying to deal with. So to get them out of that situation and into stable accommodation, that requires time, requires a lot of intensive casework, and there isn't the funding there for that, the focus. It's all about getting the numbers through the quick fix.
The lady in red, thank you, great point. Just while we get the microphone over there, can I just ask, we talked about ideology earlier. Have the ideology of government, has it changed to say, well, it's not government's responsibility, it's the community's responsibility, and if there's people like your organisation that are prepared to nestle a few resources together, they're going to do our job anyway. So is that modern economics, is it? Wow, it's pretty heartless.
The Lady in Red.
Yeah, very nice movie too. You look like her.
Hi, I am Suzanne and I'm from Generating Momentum. I am idealistic, so beware, this could be too simplistic. Though I'm thinking to myself, we have homeless people. I was once homeless when I was 15, so I understand a little bit about this. I'm thinking to myself, we have an issue that could be sequential. So do we need to get people into homes before we give them emotional support that gives them the ability to believe and to hope, that then transfers to their children and, carries on from a domino effect from that perspective? But I'm wondering, when Dr. Jim was talking about earlier, that he has made way or headway with going out to the community with people who don't have homes. So I'm wondering, can we get off the practical solution just for a moment and think about the emotional solution? How do we as a community help people to think about themselves well? How do we help people to believe in themselves? That then they pass that on to their children, because the stats show that children are the people that become homeless because of their parents. I can't remember the stats, but you will remember them. So I'm just wondering, from an emotional perspective, I understand these things go hand in hand and it might not be as simple as that, but to the panel, to the rest of the group, what do we need to do to emotionally help people to think well of themselves and understand their values and their beliefs in the world, that gives them that springboard to be able to communicate and to contribute to their family and society, even without a home? I'm just curious. I don't know the answer, but I'm curious to know what everybody else thinks.
That's a big question.
Yeah. Big question,
Well,
big heart.
it is. We have a solution? Not really? I want to get to you in a minute. I see a whole row of young people, our future, and I don't mean that insultingly, but you're a lot younger than me. I'm old, really old. You've all been sitting there taking it all in and listening to our journeys, but you're at a younger demo. I'd love for someone within the group to give us a bit of an account of maybe people that you know within the community. I'd love to hear a younger point of view, and then we'll come to you, ma'am. Is that okay?
They're with me, so they can speak.
Oh, well, you can speak for her,
Hello.
which is good.
Yeah, sure. I really don't know much. Like, I don't want to say anything and offend anyone or something.
You won't offend anyone.
But, like, it seems to me, like, I agree with you, that we need to increase social workers and educate people about homelessness, and then they can go out to these houses and work with the families, like, not on a domineering level, but more, like, work with them, help them.
Sure.
And then, that like a domino effect, it will lead on from there. And yeah, I think that's what's then like the real estate people will, sorry, I'm really nervous.
No, you're doing really well.
They'll take in more people because they'll realise it's, you know, people are better and
Sure.
getting better.
I have young kids, reasonably young, but they give me hope because when we get into debates about this kind of stuff, they have a better sense of what is right. I don't think they're driven as much by the dollar, and they do have a sense of justice, and that's what gives me hope, if you like, in an area like this more than any others, and it's harnessing that energy. Do you think we utilise the skills of people like yourself to be able to say, let's get the message across? You're nodding your head, so you do agree with that?
We're really educated at school. We like have heaps of like even this opportunity now because we're on a poverty immersion program. A lot of schools have them.
Poverty
immersion. We're on a poverty immersion program, so it's a 3-day course where we go out into the into public and go around to the soup kitchens and help out, and you know, just learn more about like homelessness in Perth. And
so does that make you feel more comfortable being in that arena?
Definitely.
I mean, you must be nervous when you first go there, surely.
Yeah, well, I mean, our school's in the city, so we see it every day of our lives. It's just, I think we're all interested in learning what it really is and how we can contribute to it. But it's definitely, like, I know talking to my parents, they always say to me they didn't get the same opportunity at school to learn about this. They just went along to school and whatever. But it's like a big part of school for us now. Like, we always learn it and we're always, you know, surrounded by it. So
is it fair to say the younger generation are less judgmental than, say, my era? I mean, I don't mean that, no? You think you're saying definitely not? They're judging us all the time.
I think
They're
that
definitely
we've
not.
like...
I mean, can I use such a wide brush, or am I being too naive?
I mean, we've grown up that it's like we've all learnt that racism's bad and that like equality and everything, and so we always go out and treat everyone equally. But I know that like a lot of older people, not being judgmental or anything, but they just... Sorry.
I think you're being honest.
Not talking here, but just...
No, I'm not going to take this. I want to take this a bit further because we were once as young as you and perhaps had similar ideology. We did have a sense of justice.
Yeah,
we did have a sense of... What goes wrong with society? What goes wrong when we say, hey, fend for yourself? It's, you know, what goes wrong?
I think it's like experience, and we're all quite naive we don't really understand money and paying taxes and everything like that, if you know what I mean. We don't know, like we live in a world where like money grows on trees, kind of.
Don't tell me about it.
You guys actually know that you have to pay.
You're outstanding. Well done. Good on you. And I mean, we always get hope because it brings us back. I'm only probably 10 or 15 years older than you, but I do feel old. Gentleman down here who's probably of my vintage and probably feels like he's that age as well.
John from St Bart's. Look, I give a lot of talks to various community groups, and I think what's happened is people have become divorced with what's happening out there. You know, we go to our suburbs, we shut our gate at night, and you know, the world is okay in our little world. We congregate with people in the same sort of position, and I think there's a real thirst out there to understand what is the real story. So, you know, I get lots of invites to give lots of talks just to small groups. They really do want to understand, but somehow that's been lost. I don't know where the stories got lost, but people have just isolated themselves from the reality out there. And
why though, John? Why?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's too hard. I'm just dealing with my issues, man.
Yeah. I don't know. I just find that people do want to know, and they come away a bit shocked and think, oh, wow, I didn't really realise that this was the case.
Yeah.
But do they do something about it? That's the big question.
So that's the challenge, is to give them that opportunity. From your comments, what I'd love to do, I think we're all fairly like-minded within the room, that we may have different strategies in how to solve it, but we all believe that everyone deserves an opportunity in life. I'd love to take you and put you on one side of a hall, and I'd love to get the economic rationalist and the capitalist who believe that you need money, because without money, none of us would be working and the whole economy would be screwed. So there's a bit of truth in what they say and there's a bit of truth in what you say. And then getting like-minded groups working together in trying to use their knowledge and their intellect in regards to capital to be able to address some of these issues. And that is a challenge, I think, is engaging that group and not saying that we're at different ends. We're actually, you have your belief, we have ours, but how do we mould them together? That's the challenge in order to change policy. We've got a couple more questions, then we've got to give the panel an opportunity to sum up. With the lady with the wonderful bows on.
My name is Rabina. I work at Australian Red Cross. Just in terms of what you were saying a minute ago about how a lot of people want to know but they're not really getting involved anymore. Australian Red Cross, we're celebrating our centenary this year, and across Australia we have 33,000 volunteers compared to around 3,000 staff members. So people are still getting involved, and although a lot of people feel like they can't make a difference in the bigger picture, they're all trying to, I think what we find with our volunteers is that they're trying to make a difference on a smaller scale. So, sorry, I'm really nervous.
You're doing really well.
In terms of one of the programs that we run for homeless people or people that are at risk of homelessness is our Soup Patrol. And we run that in 5 different locations. So I suppose closest geographically would be Perth and Fremantle. We have approximately 800 volunteers that run that service for us. We have a 0.5 coordinator that's actually paid to coordinate that, but other than that, it's completely run by volunteers. Across both locations, we have around 250 people accessing that service every week. And where you were saying earlier about is it people that are homeless or is it people just who can't cope with the cost of living? The service that we run, it's no questions asked, so we don't ask people, are you homeless, are you not? If they come to the van, we assume that they need assistance and that they're vulnerable, so we will help them. Some of them, sure, they are homeless. Others come to us with containers, or they'll come to us asking us for 4, 5, 6 cups of soup, which they're then going to take back to their friends or their family, whether it's that they're staying in the park or whether they're staying in accommodation. They're, scraping. A lot of them are scraping together the pennies to be able to pay their rent, so they're not able to afford food, which is then why they come to a service like the one that we run.
So it's encouraging that you've got 800 people that want to be involved, and what you're saying, maybe it's just a matter of asking.
It is, yeah. And as the young lady over there was saying, we do have a lot of school groups. We've got maybe 5 or 6 different school groups that come along and run that service for us.
Well done.
So
we've got to go to the panel. I'm going to go reverse order. We started off trying to address how do we best reduce the cost of homelessness. We've had some spirited discussion and some great ideas. Barry, I'm going to give you the fairy wand, okay? You can sprinkle it on whatever you want to wrap up. What's your wish?
I think there's the conversation could be divided into 2 sections. There's some of us focusing on these macro political solutions, and then there's other people who are just, look, that's the situation we're in, and we need to make the best of it, and we need to come up with these creative solutions. The fact is both things are true. So if I was to, wave my magic wand, we would have a state and federal government that would be looking at the whole issue of equity in the housing system. Why, for example, do we write off so many billions each year in negative gearing for no social good? It doesn't produce any extra housing for the people who need it. It just inflates the cost of the housing we already have. Why do we do that? Why do we give capital gains tax exemptions on this stuff? And basically, you have these policies that keep house prices inflated and keep rents inflated. And this is not a sign of a healthy economy. A sign of a healthy economy is low housing costs, because it means that investment is being directed into more productive works. So there's a whole lot of issues there. And then, yeah, I'd just like to see the sector coming together a little bit more so that when one of us does have a good idea and a program that's working, that they share it with the rest of us, and that we're working together a little bit more collaboratively.
Well done, Barry. Good work. And Margaret, the law and where you're at and the people that you deal with, you're at the coalface a lot.
Well, I guess, the Ferry One stuff, yeah, that there's no crime, that there's no homelessness, that there's adequate social housing and affordable housing, that there's adequate support services to assist those that may run into difficulties from time to time, and that basically I'm out of a job. That would be sweet.
I wish you were my fairy godmother, because I think that's terrific. I think you'd probably agree with that, wouldn't you?
I do, and I also agree with Barry at the beginning that I think there's two parts to this. We should do what we can at the coalface as it happens, as it emerges, and respond the best way we can. And at the same time, fight the bigger battle across all the political spectrums to try and make the serious changes as we go. It'll never end because problems were human. They will emerge as we go forward, and there'll be new ones in 10, 15 years' time. But I just think that's the right approach to have both levels.
Sure. And you've sat there very patiently, Doc, and you've listened to the debate. I'm glad you got a little bit out of the discussion and hearing people's stories as well.
Yeah, no, I'd actually like to package you all up and bring you home so we can have this discussion in front of City Hall.
Well, we're all available.
It's a long flight, though, just remember. No, as I hear this, I hear that you have a similar problem that we have, that we need to have leadership. We need to have political leadership that actually sees the world through the eyes that you see it every day. And we are particularly paralyzed, ashamedly paralyzed back in our country right now with a government that can't compromise on anything, so we consequently have nothing getting changed. So the need for leadership is really magnified in our world. But I do see homelessness as the if you step back from it, what we're hearing is homelessness is the end result of a long and awful journey that's made usually in utter and persistent poverty. And the issue is really poverty and how do you address poverty. And when we begin to address that, we realize we get into all these things that make you discouraged in a hurry because society's not very good at doing that. But on the other hand, I see that what you do every day, and I think what we all do every day, has a real sense of purpose and mission and fulfillment. And if nothing else, we're working with the people we want to be working with who are disenfranchised and who actually need us. So I think that's the hope that I see. And then the creativity that happens in between the lack of leadership and what we do every day is where the challenge will be for all of us. So I remember Barry was pushing me yesterday and we were talking about Robert Kennedy. There was a time in our country, there was a brief shining moment when we actually thought that poverty was something we could fix. And I can remember it was Hubert Humphrey, who was then quoted later by Robert Kennedy, saying that, when you step back, the measure of a country and the measure of a government is not in the economics, but it's in how you've taken care of those who are in the dawn of life, which are children, those who are in the dusk of life, who are the elderly, and then those who are in the shadow of life, who are those who are the poor, the disabled, and the homeless. And that quote has kind of stuck with us, and I think that's where I still get my sustenance, where I hear, I get great joy out of hearing the way you're discussing this. I think we're working uphill. It's probably an impossible task, but as Henry Moore once said, we should be devoting our lives to something we really are passionate about, and the fact that it's impossible should only make us work harder. So I would leave it at that.
Well done. Big round of applause for our panel. Fantastic. Can I also say thank you to you? I put you on the spot, I do apologise for that, but what you said was fantastic, and everybody else that contributed, and hopefully you've got enough to discuss over a cup of tea. There are plenty of other activities running through the week, and we encourage you to visit Brookfield Place if you haven't done so in the foyer. Have a look at the Hauer exhibition. And photographer Stewie Holden's done a great job in capturing some images, and hopefully a picture, as they say, tells a 1,000 words, and maybe some of the stories about those that have been shared about homelessness will open a heart or two. Also, the fact that there are other events, so check out the website for CHCWA. Thanks to our sponsor, the Department of Child Protection and Family Support, the Government of Western Australia. Thanks for them. Messages on hold, 882 6PR, 98.5 Sunshine FM and Community Newspaper Group. And lastly, thank you for being here today. I hope I didn't bore you too much. Thanks again. See you.